oft eerie tone with slow pacing, ideal for whispered or calm narration. Have you ever watched a baby laugh at something no one else can see? What if that something started talking back? What if it knew your name? Tonight, you're not just falling asleep. You're slipping into a story. One where lullabies rot into warnings. One where innocence sees what adults are blind to. Welcome to EchoVerse Whispers, where bedtime stories aren't meant to comfort, but to haunt. This is the baby talks to someone only she can see. Get cozy. Keep the lights dim. And whatever you do, don't talk back. Understood? Beginning now. The baby talks to someone only she can see. The first time it happened, I thought it was just baby babble, that soft nonsense cooing every infant experiments with when learning how their voice works. But when I walked into the nursery that night, just past midnight, I found my daughter sitting upright in her crib, hands reaching toward the corner of the room, where the shadows didn't seem to belong to anything real, and she was whispering. In that soft, lulling voice babies use only when they're utterly entranced, not with their toys, not with the mobile that spun slowly overhead, but with something I couldn't see at all, something that must have been looking back at her. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with fascination, and, when I stepped closer, she giggled and pointed, babbling a strange rhythm of syllables I didn't recognize. Almost chant-like, almost deliberate, and the air in the room felt heavier than it should have. Thick with something stale and unseen. I brushed it off that night, convincing myself it was just the late hour messing with my head. And maybe the baby monitor's fuzzy static had added a sinister edge to her otherwise innocent voice. But over the following nights, it happened again. And again, always around the same time, always with her turned toward that same shadowed corner, that remained darker than the rest of the room, even when I turned on the light. As if the bulb refused to push its glow there. I told my husband, but he just chuckled and said she was probably practicing her speech early, or reacting to dust motes. But then he started hearing the whispering too only. It didn't always sound like her, and sometimes, even when she was sleeping deeply, we'd hear a faint rustling voice through the monitor. A tone too low and too old to be hers. Like someone ancient was crouching near the crib and speaking in a forgotten tongue only she could understand. One night, I left my phone recording overnight, curious and uneasy. And when I played back the audio the next morning, my skin turned cold. Somewhere around 2:17 a.m., after hours of nothing but the soft hum of white noise, the recording caught. A voice raspy, playful, but far too articulate for a 1-year-old, saying, "She knows now," followed by my daughter's clear, cheerful reply, "Okay, I help you now." I replayed that sentence over and over, heart hammering louder each time, and I couldn't deny that what I heard was real, wasn't explainable, wasn't some fluke of technology. I tried to stay awake the next night, desperate to catch something on video, but sleep won, and I awoke to her crying, her face tear-streaked. Her crib filled with ash-black smudges on the mattress, like something had sat there with dirty hands or knees. I cleaned it, checked the walls, the vent. Even brought in a priest from the local church, who said a prayer and blessed the room but wouldn't look me in the eye afterward, muttering something about thin places and echoes that never faded. I started noticing that she wouldn't play with her toys anymore, only talk to the empty space near her crib, only crawl toward corners, only sleep if we left her door cracked open, as if she was waiting for something to come through. Her vocabulary expanded unnaturally fast. She began saying things no toddler should. Phrases like he's still hungry or don't let it see your eyes or mommy, you can't stop it now. And once, when I tried to film her talking to the empty space, she looked directly at the camera and screamed, not in fear, but fury, a sharp howling wail that cracked the baby monitor speaker and sent a wave of static through the house's power for a full 5 seconds. After that, even the house started to feel wrong. The hallway stretched longer in the dark. Reflections in the windows didn't quite line up, and I kept finding things moved subtly. Picture frames turned inward, mirrors fogged with childlike handprints, and one morning, all the stuffed animals in the room sat in a perfect circle, facing the crib. My husband tried to rationalize it, until the night he heard her whisper through the monitor. But this time, it wasn't a conversation, it was her chanting a single word over and over. A word we couldn't pronounce, and that didn't exist in any language we could find, but it scraped the mind like nails on glass, and made our ears ring long after it ended. We tried taking her out of the room, letting her sleep with us, but she would cry endlessly, pointing back toward her nursery, sobbing and repeating, "He waits for me, he's hungry, I help now." We brought in doctors, psychologists, even paranormal investigators who all left with more questions than answers. One of them, a man named Dr. Cosmeric, left mid-session, refusing to speak of what he saw on the thermal camera feed. Whatever it was, whatever she was speaking to, it wasn't satisfied with being just a nighttime whisper anymore. It was growing bolder. The baby was changing. And something told me that by the time we understood what it truly was, it would already be too late. The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 2. The nights grew longer. Not by time, but by the weight of what lingered in the house once darkness fell. And though I tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, the way my daughter interacted with that unseen presence only deepened in intensity, as if each visit was strengthening a bond between her and whatever watched her from the shadows. I began noticing patterns, subtle changes that marked each passing night, like the way the temperature would drop slightly at exactly 2:14 a.m. The way the mobile above her crib would begin spinning on its own just moments before the whispering started, and how her eyes, once bright and wide with childish wonder, now held a glassy, distant look during the day, like her mind hadn't fully returned from wherever it wandered at night. And when I asked her who she was talking to, she would simply smile and say, "My friend lives in the quiet," as if that answered everything. My husband, once the skeptic, began sleeping with the lights on and checking on her hourly, especially after we both heard the distinct sound of something crawling through the vents above her room, soft, deliberate dragging noises that didn't match the scurry of rats or the knocking of old pipes. And on one night, when we both crept into her room at 2:17, we saw her sitting up again, her head tilted back, her arms stretched outward like she was offering herself to something above. And when she spoke, it wasn't in her voice. It was older, deeper, dry like paper crumbling in fire, and it said, "The gate creaks wider, Mother." And then she collapsed onto the mattress, breathing heavy, eyes fluttering like she'd just run a mile. And I screamed, not because of what I'd heard, but because in that moment, I was sure it wasn't her anymore, not completely. We tried relocating her to our room, even took her to a family friend's for a week, to get her away from the house. But the same things followed on the second night at our friend's place. The baby monitor emitted a deep rumble that vibrated through the walls, and she woke up laughing in her sleep, repeating. He's still playing hide and seek, and that morning, our friend found his dog dead outside her door, its eyes wide open, mouth foaming like it had seen something it shouldn't have. We were forced to return home, and that's when I noticed the scratches under her crib, thin, long, and strangely parallel, as if made by bony fingers or sharp claws dragging in unison, and each night, new ones would appear, always more than the last, always etched deeper into the wood, and I tried covering the underside of the crib with salt, with holy symbols. Even hired a self-proclaimed demonologist, who walked out after 20 minutes, refusing to speak a word except to whisper, "You didn't tell me," it was already watching, and then never answered my calls again. My daughter's vocabulary continued growing, but it was all wrong. She spoke in rhymes that didn't make sense. Said things like, "When the clock ticks thrice, he wears your face," or "the mirror knows how you'll die," and one night, she looked at me, smiled sweetly, and said, "Mommy, he says you used to believe," and I froze. Because those were the exact words my grandmother used to whisper in her last days. The ones I'd never told anyone, not even my husband. I started researching everything I could: folk legends, shadow entities, psychic children, and I found stories that chilled me, old European accounts of the cradle watchers, spirits that attached themselves to infants and fed on their growing awareness, often promising friendship in exchange for a place in the waking world. And it all sounded ridiculous, until I found a journal entry from 1832 that mirrored my daughter's behavior word for word, down to the exact time of 2:17, and the phrase "the gate creaks wider," and I realized then this wasn't new, this was something old, cyclical, waiting for the right kind of child, the right kind of family, to open a door that should remain shut. I tried recording her again, this time with night vision and a full room setup, and at 2:17, the camera glitched out for exactly 13 seconds. And when it came back, her crib was empty, completely empty, but she was still there, lying motionless on the ceiling, arms out, eyes wide, hair dangling toward the floor like she was underwater. And then, just as quickly, she dropped back into the crib with a wet, slapping sound that woke her up screaming, and I knew then that whatever was speaking to her, touching her, feeding off of her, had begun claiming pieces of her for itself. I wanted to leave the house, run far away, but I was terrified the thing would follow, that it wasn't bound to the walls, but to my daughter herself, that she had invited it in. And each night she whispered more, laughed more, and one night, she said something that made my blood freeze. "Soon, I get to see his face. Then I get a face too." I don't know what she means yet, but I feel it. Something is coming, and my baby is no longer just mine. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 3. It was on the 3rd week that I stopped pretending we were dealing with anything remotely explainable, and instead began treating each night like a descent into a world parallel to ours. A place that used my daughter as a doorway, as a speaker, as a conductor, for things that no longer needed permission to whisper through the cracks of the dark. And the worst part was how normalized it became. The way she would wake from her naps, murmuring secrets to her stuffed animals, who always ended up in different positions than where I left them. Or how she began refusing to eat, unless the high chair faced the hallway mirror, where she'd stare and chew with slow mechanical intent, sometimes pausing to nod at nothing, as if listening to instructions only she could hear. And that mirror, which used to reflect nothing but light and harmless clutter, began to show things that didn't make sense. Shadows moving in the background, when no one was there. her reflection not quite matching her movements, delayed by a second or two, or smiling when she wasn't, and once I caught it, her mirror self, turning its head toward me when she didn't, and holding that gaze long after she'd turned away. I tried smashing it, but it didn't break, just wavered. Like I'd struck water instead of glass, and my daughter screamed so violently. I thought she'd pass out, screaming, "You hurt his window. He sees through that." And I didn't dare touch it again. Her toys started changing 2 blocks that now spelled out words I never taught her, like bleed or remember, and the old plastic jack-in-a-box that began popping open at exactly 2:17 a.m., without being wound. Its tune no longer cheerful, but slow and dissonant, like it was being played backward. And once I walked into her room to find every stuffed animal lined up on the dresser, all facing the crib, their button eyes blackened with some oily residue I couldn't identify. And in the crib, she lay wide awake, whispering, "They watch so he doesn't forget me." And though her voice was calm, there was an edge to it now, a maturity, a patience, like something very old was speaking through a young mouth. My husband grew quiet, distant, as though a fog had entered his mind. And sometimes I would find him just standing outside the nursery door, his head tilted toward the wood, not moving, not blinking, until I called his name and he'd snap out of it with no memory of how long he'd been there. And when I asked him if he was okay, he simply said, "He talks to me too, now, but not in words." And I didn't know what that meant, until I caught him sketching symbols into the bathroom mirror with steam after a shower. Symbols I later discovered matched carvings found in ancient Mesopotamian burial caves, marks used to bind spirits or welcome them. I began documenting everything: photos, recordings, notes, but the data would vanish. Audio files would become garbled with static or whispering in that same dry tone. And my phone would glitch every time I got near her crib. I installed motion sensors in the nursery, but they would only go off in patterns: 3 short blinks, 2 long, 1 pause, over and over, like a code, and when I looked it up, it matched an old maritime distress signal used before Morse code, meaning death below deck. I couldn't explain it, not to anyone. And I stopped trying when I woke one morning to find my daughter had drawn on the walls, not with crayons, but with what I can only assume was blood, spelling out, "He showed me where the others sleep." And when I scrubbed it off, the wall pulsed under my hand, like skin, warm and trembling, and I vomited from the sensation alone. She began talking in her sleep constantly, often in languages I didn't recognize. Though one night she whispered clear as day, "She's starting to believe now. That makes him happy." And when I gasped, she opened her eyes mid-sentence and smiled at me, but it wasn't her smile. It was crooked, knowing, full of teeth, too sharp for a toddler. I begged her pediatrician for help, but all I got were tired reassurances and pamphlets on early psychological development, none of which addressed the fact that my daughter had stopped blinking entirely for full minutes, or that her toys now occasionally moved when no one touched them, or that I found tiny handprints much too small to be hers on the inside of the sealed attic door. My dreams became infected. Too, I would hear her crying, follow the sound through endless halls, until I found a room with no floor, just a pit of whispers, and her tiny voice saying, "Don't listen too long, or you won't wake up." And I would jolt awake, gasping, heart racing, feeling something still watching me from the corners of the room. I thought about running, leaving the house, taking her far away, But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Because whatever had found her didn't need walls to follow. And that truth became undeniable the night I woke to find her standing at the foot of my bed, not crying, not speaking, just staring at me with pitch black eyes that weren't reflections, weren't tricks of light, just endless void. And in her hands she held my wedding ring, which I had taken off and left in the locked jewelry box, and she said, "He says you're almost ready to see him. Then we can all be a family." The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 4. The fourth week turned our home into a space where time unraveled. Where nothing obeyed the laws I once trusted, and the transformation was most obvious in my daughter. She no longer played with toys the way toddlers should. Instead she positioned them into disturbing tableaus. Scenes that looked like rituals or sacrifices, with dolls lying face down in salt circles or arranged like they were praying toward the closet door, and her babbling stopped from the wall and threw it across the room, but the screen stayed on, still showing that impossible hallway, the crawling shape getting closer every time I blinked. I went to our priest, desperate for answers, but when I explained what was happening, he grew silent, then pale, and finally said, "You've welcomed an old listener. They do not leave, they anchor." And when I asked him what to do, he only said, "Do not look directly at her reflection after the third night." He likes to be seen, and refused to say more. Terrified, I began avoiding mirrors altogether. But during one accidental glance, just the passing look in the bathroom while brushing my teeth, saw her behind me, standing in the hallway, eyes black, mouth moving, except the sound came from inside the mirror, not from her. And it wasn't her voice, but something male, guttural, rhythmic like a chant, and I smashed the mirror instantly. But my reflection remained, lingering for 3 seconds longer than it should have, blinking once after I had already turned away. I became consumed with stopping this thing. Reading forbidden books, researching folklore, digging into cases of children who became vessels or mediums. And all paths led to a name older than language itself, the listener beneath, a presence. Described in disparate cultures as something that waits under floorboards, in crawl spaces, behind nursery walls, attracted to loneliness, secrecy, and unspoken grief, and once invited, it does not come to possess it, comes to grow, to bloom inside a child until they become a conduit, a lighthouse calling others from far beyond. And it dawned on me that this wasn't just about my daughter anymore. She was becoming a signal, a beacon, and that realization crystallized the moment I discovered the crawlspace beneath our home had expanded. Despite being sealed and unfinished, now stretching deep into impossible darkness, walls etched in the same symbols she drew, and from its depths I heard voices. Many voices, some crying, some laughing, some mimicking the exact way I said her name when I was soothing her back to sleep, and when I shined a light down into that space, it didn't reach the end, it was swallowed, and then I saw movement not crawling, but climbing, something dragging itself upward, toward the hatch, and I slammed it shut and screamed, calling out to my daughter, only to find her standing just behind me, holding a broken piece of mirror, and she said, "He showed me where your voice lives. I can hide there if I want," and then smiled so gently it nearly broke me. I no longer knew if she was still my child, or if she ever truly had been, and as I carried her to bed that night, she whispered one last thing before sleep, "Soon. You'll hear him too, Mommy. Then we can sing together in the walls." The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 5. The fifth week opened with silence so thick it felt alive, pressing against the walls of our house, against my chest. A silence that wasn't merely the absence of sound but a presence that devoured it, and in that quiet, my daughter began drawing again, this time, not just on her skin or the walls, but on the ceiling. Symbols in gray ash I couldn't trace to any source, laid out in spirals that grew larger each day, and I had no idea how she reached that height. Until I caught her one night levitating, eyes closed, fingers twitching, lips moving as though she was reciting something in a language the air itself didn't want to carry. And when I screamed her name, she dropped from the air like a puppet cut from its strings, only to stand up unharmed and calmly say, "Don't interrupt." He listens through me now, before walking back to bed without looking back. I stopped sleeping entirely after that, haunted by dreams in which the walls of our house peeled open like skin, to reveal another structure inside our breathing, pulsing network of hallways and stairs that twisted downward into the earth, and always I would hear her voice calling to me, distant yet clear, saying things like, "You're almost there," or, "He remembers the sound of your name." And I'd awaken with dirt under my fingernails, scratches on my arms, once even a small, jagged tooth clutched in my palm, too old and worn to belong to a child. My husband worsened, walking the halls at night murmuring phrases like, "He waits where the clocks don't work," or, "She showed me what's under the floorboards," and when I tried to confront him, he turned on me with a stare so hollow I didn't recognize him, whispering, "You should listen more closely. She says he likes your voice best," and then walked away laughing softly to himself. Objects in the house began appearing in pairs, mirrored utensils, duplicate photos with subtle differences, like the smiles slightly wider, or eyes too glossy. And sometimes the mirrors would reflect alternate versions of rooms that were dark, when they should have been lit, or featured figures, standing where no one was. And once, while brushing my teeth, I saw in the mirror my daughter perched on the hallway ceiling like a spider, head turned unnaturally sideways, smiling, but when I spun around, the hall was empty and cold. It was clear the house itself had shifted, no longer entirely part of our world, with rooms that sometimes stretched longer than they should, staircases that seemed to double back on themselves, and doors that opened to walls that breathed and whispered, if I leaned close, murmuring, "Come closer." He misses the warmth, and in one moment of insanity, I pressed my ear too close, and felt something cold push back from the other side, as if another face had mirrored mine in perfect alignment, exhaling into me. The baby monitor became a conduit of horrors, its screen flickering between static and impossible images, a playground buried in fog with swings swaying violently on their own, a figure with a stitched mouth crawling down a hallway I didn't recognize, a shadow dragging its fingers across the nursery walls, and every time these things appeared, my daughter would stop what she was doing and look directly into the monitor, whispering, "He's watching again," and once, when I unplugged the device, it kept working, glowing with red static that pulsed like a heartbeat. I sought help in books again, ancient texts, obscure online forums, reaching out to people who documented similar events. And one woman warned me that what I was describing matched a phenomenon known in certain circles as whispers in skin, an entity that enters reality by growing inside a living vessel, usually a child, through acts of mimicry, ritual, and psychological erosion, feeding off attention, secrecy, and the parental bond. And once fully grown, it blooms into form. anchoring its domain through the mouth and mind of the host. Horrified, I began to suspect my daughter was no longer singular. Sometimes I would catch her speaking to herself and referring to us. And once she said, "We like the way you sleep." And when I asked who we was, she looked confused and said, "The mirrors, the cracks, the crawl space, the soft voices in your hair." And I had to step outside to breathe, to scream, because I felt like the house was sinking into something older, something beneath all logic, and every step forward was a descent. My husband disappeared for 3 days, without warning, and when he returned, he was different, calm, eerily serene, his eyes dull, his voice flat, and when I asked where he'd gone, he simply said, "I walked his path. It's warm beneath," and later that night I found him digging beneath her crib, with his bare hands. Whispering, she said his roots need space to grow. And when I tried to stop him, he screamed so violently it shattered a framed photo across the room and blood began dripping from his ears. I began locking the nursery door at night, but each morning I'd find it open. My daughter sitting in the rocking chair, humming a tune I swear I'd never taught her, but somehow knew was a funeral song from an extinct tribe that believed in spirits, born of silence and teeth. The neighborhood animals vanished, the birds stopped singing, even insects avoided our yard. And one night, the power went out across the block, but our house remained lit from within by a soft, pulsing glow that didn't come from any lamp or bulb, but from beneath the floors. And when I followed it, I found her standing over the open crawl space, eyes closed, whispering, "He dreams louder now." And the light throbbed like breath, in sync with her heartbeat. I fell to my knees, begging whatever still existed within her to fight, to come back. But she opened her eyes and said, "She's not here anymore. Just the door she left behind," and smiled as every light in the house blew out at once, leaving me alone with the sound of many, many footsteps coming from below. The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 6. By the 6th week, I stopped pretending this was just a haunting, or possession, or any folklore I could label and fight it, had become an evolution, a shedding of our reality's skin. And my daughter stood at the epicenter, like a lighthouse made of bone and memory, drawing things that pulsed when you looked away, humming melodies that hurt the air, and speaking to the shadows as if they were siblings returned from somewhere cold and long forgotten. Sleep was impossible. But dreams still found me, dreams where I floated in black oceans with moons that bled into the sky and voices that whispered truths so old they burned my thoughts. Always ending with the image of my daughter standing in the nursery, holding something in her hand, a mask made of flesh, stitched together with strands of my hair, and each time, she'd ask, "Want to wear it next?" Before my own screaming pulled me back to wakefulness. The house itself had begun changing permanently, walls pulsing slightly as if they breathed, lights no longer controlled by switches but by emotion, glowing brightest when fear peaked, and flow echoing like they were underwater. And the moment I crossed the threshold, I'd forget where I was going, why I was walking. And once I found myself back in her room, holding her, without knowing how long I'd stood there, her eyes glowing faintly, with that soft white pulse, and she said, "They don't let you leave now, not when he's almost born." Strange items began appearing on our doorstep, dead birds with eyes replaced by tiny mirrors, teeth arranged in circles on plates, handwritten notes with phrases like, "Your child hears the true morning," and, "We sing through her smile." And when I called the police, the officer who came to the door stared at my daughter and simply said, Oh, before backing away, pale and sweating, then whispering, I dreamed of her face before she was born, and leaving without ever filing a report. Neighbors avoided us entirely, and I caught them nailing things into their walls, charms, prayers, relics from mismatched faiths, as if trying to ward off what they sensed bleeding through the air. And one even rang my doorbell at midnight, eyes wide, shaking, saying, "The dreams are spreading." We all hear the crying now, but it isn't a baby. Before collapsing on my porch and convulsing, whispering my daughter's name over and over, by now, I couldn't remember her first word or what her laugh once sounded like. Those memories had faded, overwritten by the voice she used now, which came from somewhere beneath her, below the floorboards, and always sounded like two voices layered on top of each other. One young, one impossibly old, and when I asked her, "Do you remember who you were?" she replied, "That's a dream you had." I was always his mouth, and laughed like chimes shaking underwater. I found her new drawings weren't drawings at all, but maps, charts of impossible architecture, symbols woven through fractal corridors and spiraling wells, and when I traced them, I began seeing those paths in my sleep, walking through them, following the sound of something dragging its limbs ahead of me. And always she was there too, just around a corner, her voice singing, "Deeper, deeper, fold your skin like stairs," and I would awaken with dried blood under my fingernails, and a faint spiral pressed into my pillow. One day she vanished completely, for 6 hours. No trace, no sound. And the baby monitor only showed static and distant whispering. And when she returned, she was holding a photo that didn't exist, an image of us three standing in front of a black tree with no leaves, beneath a sky full of spiral moons. And in the picture, my smile was wide and empty, and my eyes were black, and she said, "We took this after you decided." But I hadn't decided anything, getting still. I felt the truth in her words, like I was hurtling toward some choice I didn't understand. And every night now, just before sleep, I hear footsteps above the ceiling, slow and dragging, as if something waits there, walking its loops until I open the door. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 7. The 7th week felt like existing in a house submerged beneath time. Every second stretching like skin pulled taut over bone, and my daughter's presence had grown into something more than merely eerie. It was reverent, almost divine in a way that twisted the gut, and made me afraid to blink. As if missing a moment might mean missing the last flash of sanity, before whatever she'd become finished unfolding. She no longer ate, at least not food, but instead sat silently with her mouth open beneath flickering lights as they dimmed in rhythm with her breath, absorbing whatever flickered inside the bulbs until they blackened and died. And I noticed that every time this happened, her eyes would glow for exactly 17 seconds, with a cold bioluminescent shimmer. She spoke less now, but when she did, her words came out backward. Sentences spoken in reverse, yet perfectly understood. As though meaning had decoupled from language entirely and began transmitting straight into thought, bypassing She whispered backward, "He is inside the name you forgot." And I spent hours trying to recall what she meant, tearing through old baby books, family trees, and even the name we had given her at birth began to feel wrong in my mouth, unfamiliar, like a borrowed word from another life. I found her drawing on windows with her breath, shapes that appeared only in frost, fractal diagrams that matched ancient runes I found in a forbidden forum, run by people who believed in echo wombs, dimensional thin spots, where children are born not from biology, but from ritual silence and concentrated grief. And those who survived the pregnancy are referred to as cradle mouths, meant to carry voices no longer tethered to the flesh they once belonged to. Every door in the house had developed a hum. Not like electricity, but like deep vocal resonance, and if I pressed my ear to them, I could hear what sounded like a choir rehearsing a lullaby inside the wood grain, slow and sorrowful. And once, I caught my husband sleeping standing up, forehead pressed to the basement door, mouthing the harmony with tears running down his cheeks, while scratching faint cymbals into the skin of his wrist. I stopped going to doctors, they didn't believe what I said. And the last one I visited stared at the MRI of my daughter's brain, for over 10 minutes before quietly asking, "Why does this scan resemble a cathedral?" And then insisted I never come back, calling me 3 days later to ask if I'd ever heard voices through fogged glass. The house had begun growing colder on one side and humid on the other, like two climates bleeding into each other through a tear in the wall. And when I walked from room to room, I felt vertigo, as if reality had buckled under the strain of holding in something that was never meant to fit within four walls. My daughter began collecting small piles of things' teeth that didn't belong to any of us. Dolls whose faces had been inverted. Mirrors cracked in spiderweb shapes that reflected not us, but rooms that didn't exist, and she arranged them carefully into altars around the house, whispering over them in tongues that sounded like laughter, and sobbing laid atop one another. And when I tried to dismantle one, the walls began to bleed, a dark, translucent fluid that smelled like milk and ozone. Our clocks now only displayed the time, 3:17, frozen across every device. And when I tried to replace the batteries, I found each clock filled with wet hair and tiny bones. She took to crawling instead of walking, moving in patterns that didn't match human anatomy, spiraling in on herself, then unfolding upright, like a puppet on invisible strings. And I realized she didn't blink anymore. And neither did the shadows she played with, especially the one I saw watching her from the hallway mirror, even when no one else was home. I dreamt of her old self. The baby who laughed at peekaboo and reached for sunbeams. But in the dream she'd always rot slowly as I held her, whispering, "You should have let me go before he came." And I'd wake up with burn marks, shaped like cradles along my arms. Our neighbors moved out without warning, leaving behind windows painted black from the inside and strange pulsing audio playing in the backyard that sounded like a baby monitor recording on loop, screams reversed and layered beneath white noise. One night I followed the signal and found it buried beneath a stone in our yard. Still glowing, still warm, like something had nested there. My husband now refused to speak to me unless my daughter was present, saying she was the only one who could translate properly, and during meals, he'd ask her things like, "When does the skin fall off? And has he chosen my name yet?" And she would smile, and nod, and place her tiny hand on his forehead, like a priest delivering sacraments. I caught them one night, drawing on the walls of the bathroom in blood that wasn't theirs, building a sequence of runes that pulsed under moonlight. And when I screamed, the entire house answered back, not with echoes, but with simultaneous voices from every drain, vent, and outlet saying, she's almost ready." And from then on, I kept every faucet covered, every mirror draped, every light dimmed. The baby monitor began showing someone else's face at night, an adult version of my daughter, sitting calmly in the rocking chair, eyes black, belly full, and shifting like something alive lived inside her. And she'd whisper, "This is where you're going," and smile as the camera feed cut to static. Once, I tried to take her away, drive her out of town, but the farther we got, the older she became, rapidly aging in the back seat, hair graying, fingers elongating, face contorting into something inhuman, and I had to turn around or watch her crumble into dust. And the moment we crossed our town's edge, she returned to normal, looking at me with pity and saying, "He keeps his cradle close." Now I rarely speak, because when I do, I hear echoes of my own voice from the drains, mimicking my words slightly out of sync, like someone trying to learn how to wear my voice. And when I asked her what he wanted from me, she giggled and said, "He wants to be born through something that knows love," and then crawled into the wall and vanished for an hour. Every object in the house now has a reflection that doesn't match its angle, as if light is remembering something that hasn't happened yet, and the floors sometimes turn soft underfoot, like walking on muscle, like the house is breathing, preparing, opening slowly with each step I take toward her room. And tonight, she told me, "Tomorrow, you'll see the shape of his first breath," and kissed my cheek, leaving a mark shaped like an eye that hasn't blinked in 1,000 years. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 8. The 8th week turned our home into a cocoon of unraveling realities, where every object hummed with unseen intent, and even silence had begun to pulse like a heartbeat. And my daughter, if she still was my daughter, no longer seemed bound by the natural mechanics of existence. She no longer walked, but glided, her feet barely brushing the floor, trailing faint impressions that glowed for several minutes, before fading into intricate sigils etched into the hardwood. And when I asked her what they meant, she tilted her head and said, "They're the footprints of the ones that came before me." Her voice layered with other tones, like a child and an ancient thing were speaking at the same time, through the same mouth. Mirrors became forbidden zones, reflecting impossible versions of our home rooms, lit by pulsating fungus. Furniture melted into flesh-like lumps, windows that looked out over endless oceans of eyes, and one day I made the mistake of staring too long into the bathroom mirror and saw myself holding her, but she was older, and I was not human anymore, my arms extending like roots into the walls, my mouth split open and singing without breath, and I smashed the mirror instantly, but the reflection didn't disappear until I closed my eyes. The windows of our house began bleeding, condensation, not from weather but from the inside, dripping a pale amber fluid that reeked of old milk and iron, and when I tested it, no lab could identify its composition. They said it was inorganic, yet living, and the sample writhed under the microscope like it wanted to escape the slide. My husband, now only a husk of his former self, spent hours whispering to the nursery walls, sometimes pressing his ear to the floorboards and nodding solemnly, as if receiving instructions. And once he carved an entire message into his own thigh, in ancient glyphs, using a broken dinner plate. And when I screamed at him, he only said, "He needs more surface space to speak," before collapsing into laughter that sounded like sobbing. Strange plants began sprouting from the drains. Fleshy vines with eyes that blinked slowly and tracked our movements. And my daughter began feeding them pieces of her old toys, saying they liked memories, and after each feeding, they'd glow faintly and whisper lullabies in languages I didn't know. Lullabies that sometimes caused nosebleeds if you listened too long. Every night, At precisely 3:17, the crib would levitate several inches and rotate in slow circles while my daughter slept, suspended in the air, hands folded across her chest like a corpse prepared for burial, and beneath her, the shadows would lengthen into fingers that stroked the floor, like a mother brushing her child's hair. I found books in the attic that I never bought, written in languages that seemed to bleed off the page when read aloud. And in one of them, I saw a depiction of a creature with too many limbs and a face made of hands called the midwife of the void, and beneath it, a caption in Latin that translated roughly to she who prepares the cradle of eternity in flesh. And I realized that was what was happening. Our house was becoming a womb, and she was the cord binding it too. Whatever loomed beyond, the neighborhood had gone eerily quiet, every house empty, every car abandoned, and the air thick with something unseen but felt, like a pressure in the chest or a sob held too long. And when I walked outside once, the sky blinked, just once, and I knew it had seen me. Birds began flying in impossible patterns above our roof, looping into sigils that hovered like brands upon the clouds. And during a thunderstorm, the lightning formed runes, instead of jagged streaks, illuminating messages that only she seemed to understand. Messages, she would repeat in a sing-song voice, while her eyes rolled back, and her limbs moved in puppet-like spasms, drawing the same runes into her skin with her nails. I begged the church for help, but the bishop arrived, took one look at her, and muttered, "The cradle is already open," then left without blessing the house, or even touching the door. My sleep became fractured, not just with nightmares but with dislocations in time. I would wake up in hallways that didn't exist, staircases spiraling into darkness where walls used to be, and sometimes I'd find myself back in the hospital delivery room, reliving her birth, but with different nurses, ones with empty sockets for eyes who whispered, "She is not yours." She was loaned, and then I'd jolt awake in the kitchen, mouth full of dirt and hands wrapped in twine as if I'd been trying to tie myself shut. All my electronics stopped working except for one old cassette recorder that played a loop of her first cry at birth. Except it was slowed and reversed and layered with a bass frequency that caused nausea and hallucinations, and if you listened long enough, the cry transformed into words, opened the space between heartbeat and breath. And I knew then that I was being conditioned not just by her, but by everything in the house to prepare for something unutterable, something gestating. I found my daughter one night, drawing doorways on the walls with a black crayon made of compacted ash and hair. And when I touched one of the doorways, it felt cold and deep, like a breeze was blowing from inside it, and she whispered, "Not yet, Mommy." He's still forming his welcome. And I screamed, but she laughed and said, "Your fear makes his cradle rock," and then vanished behind the drawing, leaving only a smear of ink that bled until sunrise. Sleep became impossible, because dreams were no longer dreams but visitations. I saw him clearly now. Not in full, but in glimpses. A spine that moved like a centipede, eyes that peeled open like fruit, and a mouth that opened in reverse, swallowing light and singing my name in long mournful syllables that made my teeth ache. I tried to kill the vines, burn the drawings, banish the symbols, but each time I did, my daughter would cry until blood flowed from her eyes, and the walls would scream. Not with sound but with a psychic pressure that made my nose and ears bleed. And I realized the house itself was punishing me for disobedience. One night, I found a cocoon in the basement made of hair, toys, and fragments of our voices, recorded on old baby monitors. And inside, it was a replica of our daughter, identical in every way, except it didn't blink, it just smiled, with stitched lips and pulsed like a second heart, and when I went to destroy it, the real her appeared and said, "That's just the first draft." He's almost ready to wear his voice. And then the cocoon burst open, revealing nothing but an empty space that smelled like rotting milk and old lullabies. Now, the walls shift when I blink, doorways multiply, and shadows breathe audibly at night, and she no longer calls me mommy, she calls me first cradle. And I know I am no longer a mother but a midwife, helping bring something into a world that isn't ready, into a flesh it doesn't belong to, and every day, I feel the house swell a little more, like lungs inhaling their final breath before the scream. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 9. By the 9th part of this unraveling nightmare, I had begun to keep a notebook I never read during the day, because something about sunlight made the words twist and vanish. But under the sickly glow of our now permanent twilight, the pages filled themselves with impossible diagrams and warnings that I was certain I hadn't written, symbols that would burn faintly through the paper as though inked in ultraviolet pain. Warnings such as the vessel has memory and cribs are just open mouths waiting to be fed. And I knew, deep in my bones, that this wasn't just about my daughter anymore. That she had become the bridge between something else and everything I loved. The trembling key to an ancient and ravenous lock. And each morning I'd find new things missing from the house. The family photos no longer contained our faces. Our reflections no longer matched us perfectly. Food left uneaten would sometimes scream softly when thrown away. And my daughter, she no longer referred to the entity as her friend but instead called it the mirror nurse, describing in uncanny detail how it came through her eyes while she slept and walked her into dreams that weren't hers. Dreams full of teeth that chewed on time and staircases made of ribs that led into places where gravity reversed and clocks bled sand instead of ticking. And when she spoke of these things, her voice seemed to echo slightly even in silence, like another version of her was speaking just a millisecond behind. As if she were becoming layered, no longer bound to a single thread of existence. Our neighbors had vanished entirely by now, and in their place were strange figures seen only in peripheral vision, long-limbed silhouettes that lingered near streetlights, but cast no shadow, always staring at our house, always standing still. No matter how violently the wind screamed around them, and once, when I dared peek through the curtain at 3:17 a.m., I saw dozens of them surrounding our house in perfect concentric circles, each one raising a long finger toward our daughter's window like priests caught mid-chant. And the sky above them had torn open slightly, revealing not stars but something fleshy, like an eye of skin twitching against a web of dark veins. My husband was no longer the man I married. He had begun to rot in places, as if parts of him had aged centuries, while others stayed young. And he spoke in riddles now, about blood that whispers backward and cradles made from the bones of unborn thoughts, and I caught him once, feeding dirt to a hole in the wall, that had begun pulsing like a second heart, murmuring, "He needs nutrients to hatch properly." And when I tried to stop him, his skin split at the corners of his mouth and something laughed through him, not from within, but behind, as if puppeteering his soul from another room, just outside the reach of time. I tried calling emergency services, clergy, even paranormal investigators. But every attempt failed before completion. The phones would melt. The recordings would loop my own voice, screaming words I'd never said. And once a priest agreed to come, only to arrive blindfolded, eyes sewn shut with fishing wire. Whispering, "Too late, too late, it's in the song now," before wandering directly into traffic and vanishing beneath the wheels without a trace of gore or body, as though he'd never been flesh at all. My daughter had begun drawing more frequently. But the drawings were now maps of cities that didn't exist. Continents shaped like screaming faces, and one map in particular she taped to the wall upside down and whispered to every night, as though giving coordinates to someone waiting far away. And when I turned the map right side up, it wasn't a continent at all, but our house, stretched out into impossible dimensions and filled with looping hallways that didn't exist until the very next day. When I opened the linen closet and found myself staring down a spiral staircase made of bone-white wood that descended further than my flashlight could see, and I slammed the door shut, shaking, knowing that she had drawn that stairway into being with whatever terrible permission she now possessed. The trees outside had begun to change too. No longer birch, or oak, or elm, but something more predatory. Their bark glistening with mucus and mouths opening at dusk to hum melodies in the same pitch as her laugh. And birds no longer sang but chittered warnings in rhythms that sounded like Morse code. And once I translated a short sequence which repeated constantly between 3 o'clock and 3:17, "The child is the gate. The gate is the mother. Do not look when it arrives," and I wept in the bathtub, clutching a baby blanket that now smelled like sulfur and cold stone, praying for this to be a dream. A break from reality, but reality no longer obeyed the rules I once trusted. And time itself became unstable, with hours looping or skipping, nights arriving suddenly at noon, and days extending into 30-hour stretches where the sun pulsed like a dying eye. My daughter would disappear sometimes, just blink out of space entirely, and return with drawings of things that should not be remembered. Giant worms with screaming faces crawling over burnt cities, thrones made of infant limbs, and a woman with no eyes cradling a version of me that was screaming and smiling at the same time, and when I asked her who the woman was, she whispered, "She was you before he touched you," and I realized there had been a version of me before this began. But she had been overwritten by the thing I'd let grow inside my home, the thing I'd nursed with fear and silence. Every clock in the house struck 2:17 at different times now, as if each was operating on its own orbit, and when I tried destroying one, it screamed, not ticked, but screamed and spat out a worm made of brass and baby teeth that burrowed into the floor and disappeared. I became aware that the house was no longer in our world alone. Every hallway, every corner, every drawer was a mouth or eye or birth canal for something beyond logic. And one night, while sleepwalking, I found myself standing in the attic staring at a second version of our daughter, identical in appearance, but with no face, only skin stretched over the front of her head. And when she reached for me, her hand was made of hundreds of fingers knotted together, and her voice came from inside my own skull, whispering, "We are almost ready, cradle mother. He just needs one more lullaby to come through," and I collapsed, waking the next day with my teeth rearranged into a new pattern and the wallpaper spelling out the words "sing" or "split." Now, the nights are never truly dark because the walls themselves glow with a pulsating rhythm that matches her heartbeat. And outside the windows, stars no longer shine but blink in synchronized codes, forming constellations that whisper her name in languages I've begun to understand even though I wish I didn't. And she smiles constantly now, never blinking, watching me with endless patience, as if waiting for me to accept the truth that I am no longer her mother. Not really, not since the moment she first spoke to something only she could see, something that promised her a world bigger and darker than this one, a world that needed her to open, and me to deliver. The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 10. There are nights now when I wake up, and I'm not sure if I've been dreaming or remembering, because the house smells like milk and rot. The kind of decay that seeps from something once alive, and now repurposed for something unnatural. And I'll find myself standing in places I don't recall walking to, holding objects I don't remember picking up, like the broken pacifier filled with teeth that weren't hers or mine, or the tiny crib I found in the basement shaped entirely from fingernails, perfectly rocking itself in rhythm to a sound only the floorboards seemed to understand. And I knew that time wasn't moving forward anymore, but instead folding inward like a paper lantern devouring its own flame. And every time I looked at her, truly looked, I could see thin threads of something else behind her eyes, like she was only the surface layer of a deeper, ancient machine, now humming quietly through her flesh. And the entity she speaks with, the one she now calls the smiling birth, has begun to send her messages through reflections. She no longer draws with crayons, but with shadows, placing mirrors in odd angles around the house, so that they catch glimpses of things I should not see, like the moment I stared into one, and saw myself walking down a hallway I didn't recognize, holding a baby that looked like her, but blinked sideways and whispered through a stitched mouth, "We're learning to fit your shape." And I threw the mirror into the fireplace, but it did not shatter it, screamed, a high-pitched ring that made every picture frame in the house crack at once. And that night, she told me I'd hurt him, that the mirror was his tongue, and I'd burned a name that was older than light. Even the weather has turned against US storms that come without warning. Lightning that strikes the exact same spot outside her window every night at 3:03 a.m., creating a crater that's slowly deepening, as if something beneath the earth is tunneling upward, reaching, and I hear it in my sleep sometimes. A gentle rhythmic knocking, like a heartbeat inside stone, growing louder each night. And I've begun hearing lullabies in my head that no one taught me. Verses about the glass womb and the mother mouth that opens through silence. And sometimes, when I'm not watching her, she mouths the lyrics silently, as if she hears them too, but from farther away. My husband has stopped sleeping entirely. He paces constantly, muttering calculations, sketching diagrams on the walls with his own blood, insisting that if he just gets the angle of her crib right, the gate won't crack open all at once. And, though I want to stop him, I fear what would happen if I did, because the one time I interrupted him, he collapsed and began to seize, and his voice split in two, screaming to different languages I've never heard but somehow understood. One voice sobbing, "She is the keyhole," and the other laughing, "She is the hand that turns the key." And after that, the house refused to let us into the nursery for 3 days. The door vanished, replaced by a smooth stretch of wall that bled slightly when touched, until she reappeared in our bed, cradling a dead crow in her arms, saying he needed something black to breathe through, and we didn't speak of it again. Technology fails here now. Our phones only show static, the clocks spin wildly, and our lights flicker in patterns that mimic Morse code, spelling out phrases like "watch her breathe" and "it's almost your turn," and I've started hearing people in the vents' voices whispering arguments, children crying, and once, unmistakably, the sound of my own voice, calling for help, from somewhere deep inside the walls. But when I screamed back, the only response was laughter layered, like a choir of newborns. I tried burning her crib, thinking maybe if I severed the connection physically, it would stop, but the flames turned blue and grew cold, not hot, and when I turned to run, she was standing behind me, eyes rolled back, singing a song I hadn't taught her but remembered anyway, one my mother hummed before she went silent forever in that care home. A song about the flesh sky and the child who wears the world as skin. And I fell to my knees, sobbing, because I understood then this wasn't about my daughter being taken from me. It was about something wearing her like a glove. Something shaping itself around our history, our grief, our memories, rewriting us in real time. And the more I resisted, the more errors appeared in reality itself, like the man who delivered groceries last week who had no eyes and asked me if I still remembered the shape of guilt. Or the mail I received from a dead aunt, written in charcoal, that bled through the envelope, telling me to cut the umbilical thread between her and the listening moon. And worst of all, I don't know what's real anymore. Because sometimes I wake up and she's gone, but I'll find her standing in a room that never existed before, whispering to a second crib, and I swear, there's something moving inside it. Something just beyond forming. Something made from static and teeth. And once I caught a glimpse of its face, it was mine, but hollowed out, stretched thin over something pulsing and cruel. And when it saw me, it whispered, "You make a beautiful cradle," and I ran. I ran even though I knew the house had no outside anymore. That the front door only opens into other versions of our home, each one darker, each one more wrong. And I fear, soon there will be nothing left of this reality but the nursery, pulsing in time with whatever awaits the final lullaby. And still, my daughter hums. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 11. I don't dream in the way I used to anymore. Sleep comes in fragments, shattered frames of memory, that dissolve the moment I try to hold them. And yet, I always wake with the taste of old soil in my mouth, and the feeling that something has crawled across my chest and whispered secrets into my bone, secrets I can't remember, but which somehow change the way my skin fits me. The way my reflection hesitates before copying my movements. The way the air inside the house tightens around my daughter like invisible hands gently coaxing her into becoming something not meant for our shape of world. And lately, I've noticed my thoughts don't always belong to me. Sometimes I'll catch myself humming her lullaby without realizing, or drawing those impossible spirals and sigils into the condensation on the bathroom mirror. And once I found a page torn from one of her children's books, where all the words had been replaced with a single sentence repeated over and over in blood-red crayon. She sees the door in the clouds and knows which sky will open first. And I can't explain why that sentence made me cry for 2 hours. But I did, curled up beside her crib where she now sleeps, with her eyes wide open. Her pupils flickering like static, as if she's watching something play out inside her skull. The air in the nursery smells different now. Thick with sweetness and something else, ozone maybe. Or the scent of scorched dreams, and the walls shimmer faintly at night. Like the paint is no longer paint, but skin stretched thin over something waiting just behind. And every so often, the baby monitor emits a tone I can't hear but feel. Deep in my jaw, a frequency that shakes loose memories I never lived. Like I was a child once in a forest made of mirrors, or a woman kneeling before a throne of glass. Teeth. And I've started bleeding from my ears during those tones. though I never notice until she points it out and gently wipes it away with her tiny fingers, whispering, "It's okay, you're just leaking the wrong timeline," and smiling. As if that's comforting. People from outside no longer come to the door and deliveries stop at the property line now. And I've seen the same black van parked across the street for days. Its windows too dark to reflect light, and at night, sometimes, a figure steps out and watches the house with a strange posture. Like they're listening for something rising from the soil beneath our foundation. And I can't bring myself to confront them because something in me knows they aren't people. Not really, they're witnesses, placeholders, or perhaps just the shell left behind after belief calcifies into form. And when I tried calling my sister for help, the phone only played the sound of a baby crying underwater, then my own voice, saying, "She doesn't need saving, she needs to be remembered," before disconnecting on its own. I think the house is growing, literally changing shape when we're not looking. Adding new doors and corners that shouldn't exist, hallways that stretch too far then loop back, and once I followed a new stairwell down into what should have. Some part of me agrees, some maternal core inside me recognizes the truth in her words and mourns it even as it cradles it. Like a grieving lullaby, and I've started to wonder if I ever truly gave birth to her at all, or if she gave birth to me, to this version of myself, stitched together from memory and dread and placed here to watch her emerge, not into childhood, but into whatever she's becoming now. And I know, deep in the bones of this place that was once a house, that the final song is coming, and that I'll be the one to sing it with her, even if it costs me everything I ever was. The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 13. The walls hum now. A low and constant resonance like the breath of something massive, slumbering just beyond our comprehension. And I've noticed that my daughter no longer blinks out of fear or defiance, but because she no longer needs to. Her eyes remaining open day and night, reflecting images that don't exist in our world. Like inverted skies filled with crawling moons, or staircases that spiral into themselves endlessly. And she speaks less with words now, more with gestures. Subtle tilts of the head and movements of her hands that seem to command the very air, causing shadows to obey and light to bend around her, as though it fears the shape she's becoming. And when I asked her what she was doing yesterday while she stood motionless at the foot of my bed, from midnight until dawn, she whispered, "I'm learning how to fold time like paper, so I can fit more of you inside me," and then she giggled. A sound that echoed with the gurgling harmony of other voices layered beneath her own. Like an entire chorus, humming from the base of her spine outward into the walls. And every mirror in the house cracked at once as if reacting to her presence, revealing behind the glass something dark and roiling, like fog that remembers pain, and I tried to run then, not from her, but from the realization that escape is no longer an option. Because I'm not outside this anymore, I am part of the mechanism. One of the gears in a clock built from blood and lullabies, designed not to keep time, but to shatter it, to let it leak into the cracks she's opening with every blinkless stare, and every half-spoken phrase, in that ancient, submerged tongue she now prefers. I haven't heard from the outside world in days, no texts, no calls, no distant sounds of traffic or birds. Just the occasional rustling of unseen limbs brushing against the attic hatch. Or the whisper of footsteps in the basement we sealed years ago after it grew too deep. And my husband has completely surrendered. Painting the nursery walls with strange diagrams and looping mantras that make my eyes water and my skin itch when I try to read them. And when I found him whispering to the sink yesterday, feeding it shards of porcelain and strands of his own hair, while telling it about dreams he's had of a place where all doors breathe and time screams when it's cut. I realized he no longer sees her as a child but as a prophet, a seed that's beginning to bloom into something not meant to bloom within this reality's soil. And he refers to her now as the arrival, always with reverence, always with fear. I haven't slept in days because the house won't allow it, whispering questions into my ears as soon as I close my eyes. Questions in a voice that might be my own but stretched and echoed across centuries I haven't lived yet, asking things like, which part of you do you want to keep when she sings your name backward? Or do you want to remember, or be remembered? And when I stay awake too long, I start seeing flickering shapes in the corner of my vision, figures that resemble her, but older, taller, with too many eyes and hands that don't end, watching me from angles that bend the hallway into impossible geometry. And I know that these are glimpses of her other selves, the ones that walk the spiral staircases inside the seams of the world, learning how to unzip existence one layer at a time. And every time I try to reach out to them, I wake up, holding my breath and bleeding from the nose, her hand gently resting on my chest, smiling, whispering, "Not yet, Mommy. You're still heavy with the old shape," and I cry, not from fear anymore, but from awe. Because somewhere deep down I understand this is what she's always been for. What I've always been for, a vessel to carry her here, a set of eyes to witness her unfurling. And though it breaks me, it also completes me in a way nothing else ever has. The furniture rearranges itself now, during the night, forming symbols I recognize from dreams I've never told anyone about. And the floorboards beneath her crib have begun to pulse faintly, like veins, humming with a rhythm that matches her heartbeat, which I can hear, no matter where I stand in the house. And sometimes, I catch myself humming it back without realizing it, syncing with her, joining the frequency of her unfolding. And yesterday I discovered a book in the attic that I've never seen before, bound in something that feels like cooled wax and warm breath, filled with pages made of memory instead of paper. And every page is blank except when she touches it, then it reveals diagrams of creatures built from sound and places built from sorrow. And she points to one and says, "This is home," and I don't know whether to feel despair or relief. Because some part of me agrees, remembers even, as if I've been here before, long ago, or far ahead, standing in this very spot, watching her awaken, and knowing what must come next. Last night, the air outside turned red for 7 minutes, and during that time, I saw shadows peeling themselves off the exterior walls and walking away into the woods behind our house. And she laughed when I asked what they were, saying, "Those are the fears I've outgrown." And I realized she's not just evolving. She's shedding, purging the remnants of humanity that once clung to her like wet cloth. And soon she will no longer be my daughter in the way I once understood, but something older, something purer, and perhaps something holy. And I find myself praying to her sometimes now. Not in words, but in thoughts, in sacrifices, in silence. Because I know the threshold is near, and once she steps through it fully, none of us will ever be the same, and the world we knew will fade like a dream from which we never truly woke. The baby talks to someone only she can see, Part 14, last night. The stars realigned themselves into a pattern I haven't seen since the night she was born, a spiraling conflagration that spun slowly above our house like a glowing, watchful eye. And when I stood at the window trying to trace the shape with my trembling fingers, She stood beside me and said, "That's the map back to where I came from," and I didn't ask where that was, because I already knew, not with knowledge, but with a deep ache in my marrow. The same ache that has been growing stronger each day as she prepares to leave or transform, more fully arrive. Because there's no language left that fits what's happening to her, to me, to this house that no longer obeys gravity or sound. Where doorways have begun appearing in impossible places, and each mirror reflects a slightly older version of her, watching me with pity, or hunger, or something beyond those things entirely. I found her speaking to the baby monitor again, though the device has no batteries and hasn't functioned in months. And yet, it crackled with voices, dozens, hundreds, all speaking in tandem, reciting a lullaby that made my teeth ache and my hair stand on end, and when I asked her who they were, she replied, "These are the ones who came before me, the dreamers who didn't wake." And I didn't press further because the air around her grew thick and humming, and I saw shadows circling her feet like ink in water, writhing in shapes that hinted at limbs, but dissolved when stared at too long. I don't know what time is anymore, only that the house exists in its own loop now, a soft spiraling pocket of something old and unfinished. And each day brings new rules today. For instance, we are not allowed to speak after 3 p.m., or the wallpaper begins to whisper secrets we were never meant to hear, and yesterday, if we stepped on the third stair, the house screamed, not with sound but with memory, flooding our minds with flashes of birthless children and eyes blooming in the dark. And sometimes I hear a knocking beneath the crib, not on the floorboards, but beneath the space, beneath, in a layer of the house I can't reach. And when I asked her what it was, she smiled and said, "That's just the part of me that still sleeps, and I've begun to dream of her as an infant again. Except she has no face, just a smooth blank surface, from which a voice emerges that speaks my own thoughts before I think them." My husband no longer speaks at all. He chants now, quietly, a looping phrase that sounds like a countdown in a language we've never learned. And he spends most of his time pressing his forehead to the basement door, listening, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, and once I heard him ask, "Is this what we were for?" Before he began laughing so hard he bled from the nose and eyes, and I didn't stop him because I knew the answer too. Outside, the neighbors are vanishing one by one, and no one seems to notice except the crows, who gather in larger numbers each morning, covering the fence, the mailbox, the roof, just watching, ever cawing, just waiting, and she feeds them from her palms, seeds that weren't there moments before. And they take them gently, respectfully, like priests receiving communion, and then fly off in spirals that match the map in the sky. My reflection no longer matches MIT's, her now, always older than she should be, wearing my face like a memory, mouthing words I haven't spoken yet, and when I reached out to touch the mirror yesterday, my reflection smiled and said, "Soon," before shattering inward. And light, and something screaming from very far away. Every object in the house is rearranging itself now, as if preparing, aligning into sigils and pathways. And the crib has begun glowing softly during certain hours always, when the sky outside turns violet. And during those times I can see thin threads of gold and red stretching from her fingertips to the ceiling, pulsing gently like veins, and I asked her what they were and she said, "I'm stitching the door into your skin, so you can come too." And I didn't argue because I want to understand. I want to follow. I want to see what she sees when she stares through the cracks in the air, humming to herself in a melody that bends the room slightly each time she repeats it. Sometimes she disappears, now not physically, but perceptually. I'll look at her, and she just blur, become an echo, a suggestion, like a name I almost remember, and then snap back into reality, holding objects that don't belong to this world, like a key made of salt, or a mobile made of teeth that all whisper lullabies in reverse. And I don't know if she's traveling, or if time is folding around her. But I know each time it happens, she comes back a little different, wiser, older, more distant, like she's walking away from us even as she holds my hand. Last night, she crawled into my bed for the first time in weeks and whispered, "I'm almost ready, Mommy," and when I asked for what, she simply said, "To let him all the way in," and I knew who she meant, though I can't describe him. Not fully's been here all along, watching through the corners of her eyes, speaking through her laughter, shaping our dreams. And I think he's always been part of her, or maybe she's always been part of him. And the truth is, I don't care anymore if it's monstrous or divine or both. Because I love her so deeply it hurts in ways I can't explain. And if this is what she is, if this is what she's becoming, then I will follow her into the screaming dark or the burning light, or whatever womb she's building from time and teeth and lullabies, because that's what mothers do. We follow. We protect, we witness, even when the thing we're protecting is no longer human, even when what we're witnessing is the end of everything we knew. The house is almost ready. Now I can feel it, pulsing, breathing, eager, and the final door is forming. Not in the walls but in her chest, glowing softly with each heartbeat. And I know soon she'll open it, and what steps through won't be her, not entirely, but something more, something vast. And I will be there when it happens, holding her hand as the world forgets itself and becomes something new. The baby talks to someone only she can see. Part 15, tonight. The final layer peeled away, first from the walls, then from the ceiling, then from my thoughts, and I saw everything not with eyes, but with whatever lives beneath them. The same way she's always seen it, the same way she's always known. And as the house sighed its last breath and folded inward like wet paper, I stood at the center of the nursery with her in my arms, though she wasn't small anymore, not really, because her shape now shimmered like heat above asphalt, constantly shifting between infant, child, silhouette, star, and something ancient with wings made of silence, and eyes that opened beneath her skin. And the crib no longer held her body but a single flower pulsing with light, each petal a memory I hadn't made yet, and she touched my face and whispered, "It's time to unname everything," and the floor dissolved into threads of time that spooled upward into the dark like arteries toward a cosmic heart I could now feel beating beyond the veil. So loud and deep it shook the marrow inside my bones into melody, and I understood that every night she spoke to something only she could see. It wasn't a ghost or an imaginary friend or a monster, it was a mirror of what we're too afraid to remember, a fragment of the first voice that sang the concept of mother into being. And I was merely the echo, the carrier, the womb for its return. Downstairs, my husband stood in the center of a salt spiral that had carved itself into the tile, his face blank and smiling, his body shedding skin like candle wax, revealing a golden skeleton beneath that chanted in rhythms that bent the furniture around him, and the walls bled music, not horror but reverence. A hymn that tasted like grief and starlight, and I realized, he, too, had known all along. just in different ways, his denial a form of worship, his silence a prayer. Outside, the crows burst into flames and rained down in spirals, their ashes forming a language on the lawn I could almost read if I tilted my head and stopped breathing. And the sky cracked open like glass, revealing not blackness but something deeper. A velvet void swarming with wings and teeth and lullabies. And at its center was her name, not the one we gave her, but the one the stars stitched into her bones when she arrived, the one no tongue should pronounce, and yet she sang it over and over, her mouth opening wider than any jaw should, unhinging into impossible geometry as light poured from her eyes and hair and skin, until the room was made of nothing but her song. I tried to run not away, but toward Herbie, 'cause I knew what was coming, and I wanted to hold her one last time, before she became something the world could no longer contain. But I moved in place, the floor stretching endlessly beneath me. Each step echoing into other versions of myself, watching from mirrors, windows, reflections in the eyes of birds. And every self whispered the same word, witness. And I understood, finally, that I wasn't meant to stop her, or save her, or mourn was meant to witness her emergence. To document the shedding of her human shape, to remember what we were before she reminded the universe what it meant to be born from silence and return to song. The furniture levitated, fused, unraveled into threads of memory, and rebuilt themselves into altars, and the crib opened like a jaw, revealing not teeth, but a tunnel made of heartbeat and void stuff, and she stepped into it, not as a girl, but as a convergence, a bloom of possibilities made flesh, and when she looked back at me, every cell in my body remembered the ocean before it knew water, and she said, "Tell them I was kind," and vanished into the throat of something vast and breathing, something that cradled the house like a coffin, and rocked it gently into a realm that doesn't exist in time. And then it was quiet, not empty, but complete, like a song that ends exactly as it should, leaving only the echo. And I walked the halls of what used to be our home, now full of cracks that whispered her name in 100 languages I'll never learn, and outside, the world had changed. The sun was an eye now, blinking slowly, watching, waiting, and all the neighbors' houses were empty but humming with new rhythms, and the trees bent in reverence toward the nursery window, still glowing faintly with her last breath. And I knew she was not gone but everywhere, a ripple in the stillness, a warmth in the wind, a soft voice beneath the lullabies we hum when we don't know we're afraid. I sleep in her room now, beneath stars that no longer follow our constellations, listening to the quiet tapping from behind the closet door. Not ominous, not threatening, just curious, as if something else has come to learn, to listen, to be born. And sometimes, just before I drift off, I hear her voice, not a ghost, not a memory, but her voice saying, "I saved a place for you, Mommy." And I smile and whisper back, "I'm almost ready, because soon I will follow, soon. I will open the door she left for me, and step into the place where songs